Scott Adams, creator of the satirical Dilbert comic strip, dies at 68. His Chronicles of a Corporate Cubicle Dweller was widely distributed until racist comments on his podcast led newspapers to cut their ties with him. And that makes me mad because he was responding to a Rasmussen poll. And this was a few days ago now, but if you don't know, I'm sure everybody does. Scott Adams passed away from advanced prostate cancer. And he was a very close friend of Rasmussen Reports. Ted, our owner, actually talked to him a lot on DMs. He shared a lot of news and information. Scott gave us a lot of input, and he actually was pretty publicly kind of ambivalent to polls. He actually had a pretty good clip one time where he says, I don't really pay attention to polls very much. I read them and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Americans think this. But he had a lot of personal agency and he liked to use logic, and, each to their own. There's an aspect of polling that's important. There's another aspect of polling where it's like, hey, it's not the end all be all. You know what I mean? And he acknowledged that, but he did find some polls that he really liked from time to time. I interacted with him personally a decent amount as well. Fascinating guy. Huge contribution to our society. A lot of really important and interesting books. And I remember, when did they launch Dilbert? I remember reading it like a long time ago. When did Dilbert start? 1989. So that brings me back. So when I was in 5th grade, we used to get the print newspaper. And I would have been 10 or 11. Yeah. We used to get the print newspaper. And I think I remember Dilbert coming out. I think I do. Because I was the big Calvin and Hobbes reader, and that's really the only thing I read. And so there was a high bar for my attention. And when Dilbert came out, maybe it was 6th grade, when Dilbert came out, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to read this. I think it's fascinating. And that's kind of interesting too, because, as a 10 or 11-year-old, I don't know what the office culture is like. And that's what Dilbert was about. Maybe it was later. I really don't remember. Was it widely syndicated then? No, it was first published in newspapers in 89. When was it when did Dilbert get syndicated in the Asbury Park Press? Maybe I'm full of crap. I don't know. Yeah, nationally syndicated in the Asbury Park Press. Oh, it wasn't specified. Well, anyways, Donald Trump put a touching True Social post out, and a lot of people did obituaries. And the headlines here, if you read them, are pretty nice. But not everybody was nice. There was a lot of scummy stuff that came up. Things like this from the New York Times. Scott Adams, creator of the satirical Dilbert comic strip, dies at 68. His Chronicles of a Corporate Cubicle Dweller was widely distributed until racist comments on his podcast led newspapers to cut their ties with him. And that makes me mad because we're going to examine that tonight, because he was responding to a Rasmussen poll, if you don't know the story. And so we'll tell a little bit of Scott Adams lore and explain exactly what happened. I don't have his clip queued up. I think everybody saw it, but I'll show you the actual crosstabs that he was reacting to. It's pretty fascinating. And so for a guy that didn't really care that much about polls, one of them was very important in his career. And it wasn't negative. Like, he was actually pretty open about how getting away from the syndication handcuffs like opened him up to be more of a influencer and stuff like that. So, it just changed his career. He did more books. He did more stuff on the internet. He did his strip privately. There was this, and some of these were really egregious. Like, this one was in the headlines. People, Scott Adams, disgraced Dilbert creator, dies at 68. Somebody put up how people covered OJ Simpson, and it was like a fawning headline for his obituary. Yet they had to put the word disgraced in for Scott Adams. It's really freaking disgusting. But he had some legacy, a lot of important legacy. But I think that this is one of his segments. This is awesome. This is the one that Ted likes most. And he was a big election integrity guy. And I don't want to talk about the shot. Well, there was the whole thing about the shot too. And that was, I guess a lot of what he was going through was the public discussion around his decision making process for all of these things because he focused on persuasion. But we were election integrity bros. And he put this out.
Everybody looking for these, little bits of evidence of whether this election was stolen or not. It's complete misdirection. You don't need evidence if bullies chase down the witnesses.
You're not letting me in? No.
Let me say that again. Bullies chased out witnesses in the key cities.
All the Republican challengers out of this room.
So keep that fact, just as one little fact. Bullies chased out witnesses to the vote count.
You're here. Move your hand.
The majority inspector threatened to slap me in the face.
If you're telling us to leave, we will leave.
Yes.
Okay, Sergeant, we will leave.
Let us in. They won't let us out. They put cardboard over the windows.
They put cardboard over the windows?
Will you let them in?
Can't.
Every fucking thing you say after that doesn't matter. All that matters is it was non-transparent by force. And if you allow yourself to imagine the other stuff matters, you are victim of misinformation and misdirection.
So he didn't put this together, but he made those stunning words. And I think it shows you the power of words, which is something we deal a lot with polling too. Because just recently, Trump was talking about comprehensive immigration reform. And he actually told the New York Times in an article that he was looking for a pathway to citizenship. And he didn't really specify. I know he's working on immigration deals behind the scenes. But why would you call it comprehensive immigration reform? Like, we have a system. It has rules. It would be better if we just followed the rules. Why do we need new rules? We should just follow the ones we have. And so when you frame it like comprehensive immigration reform, you're already starting, in my opinion, from a place of confusion and mistrust and like loaded words, because we've heard comprehensive immigration reform before. And it's when Obama was trying to sort of like cram amnesty into everybody, right? Why not call it, like, if you're going to pass a law, call it the Immigration Accountability Act, where you hold people accountable for not, like I'm just saying, non-transparent by force. In the years I've been doing this, that's one of the most profound explanations of a very complex topic that a lot of people spend a lot of time on. And I think that was a pretty big influence. And then also Grum's put this chart out, and I hadn't really seen this yet, but I don't know if you know this, but Scott Adams had a son that died from a fentanyl overdose. The fentanyl deaths are crashing. This is an astounding chart of the impact of voting for Trump, who closed the border. I don't know why this isn't talked about more frequently, why this isn't lauded everywhere. I mean, this is freaking stunning. And you know that this is part of the subversive behavior of the Chinese Communist Party. Look at it, basically started when Trump started winning elections. I really wonder what happened in 2014, which is like the inflection point. I really wonder. But they've been helping manufacture the stuff. They've been working with the cartels to flood our country with this, and it has stopped. It is out and out stopped. And so it's stunning to think, and it makes me wonder, well, when I hear that we basically took the leader of Venezuela and now we have access to their oil resources, when we are talking about increasing the Department of Defense budget from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, when we're talking about a land grab for places like Greenland, and when we see the subversive fifth generation warfare tactics failing now, how many more are failing behind the scenes that we don't know about? And to what drastic extremes is China being pushed behind the scenes? I think it's a valid question. Tucker Carlson, I don't want to get off Scott too much, but Tucker Carlson had a good monologue before the Megyn Kelly interview that's worth looking at. And he talked about, well, this is empire building. If we looked at Venezuela and said, it's better for us if that person wasn't there, let's just take him out. What's to stop China from just saying, well, it's better if we had Taiwan, so let's just take it. So I don't know. I'm worried about what the world's going to do now. But getting back to Dilbert, This is the story. This is one of the stories. NPR is as good a place as any to see this. Distributor newspapers drop Dilbert comic strip after creator's racist rant. This is February of 2023, so like 3 years ago now. The distributor of Scott Adams' Dilbert comic strip, Andrews McKeel Universal, announced Sunday it was severing ties with the cartoonist. This came after Adams urged white people to get the away from black people during a racist rant on his online video program last week, during which he labeled black people a hate group. The Washington Post, the LA Times, and other newspapers across the country had already announced that they would no longer carry the syndicated comic strip. Adams opens the episode of the online program discussing the presidential bid by Republican multimillionaire entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. Then, 13 minutes into the video, Adams begins his screed. It wasn't a screed. Like they're using bad words on purpose here. Venomous screed by citing the results of a recent public opinion poll conducted by the conservative-leaning Rasmussen reports. This is better than some articles because some articles accused us of being racist too. The Southern Poverty Law Center actually reached out to us and asked why we were asking racist questions. So we'll look at the poll. Actually, you know what? We don't need to see the rest of this article. Let's go straight to the crosstabs. This is the story that did it. This is the one that Scott Adams was reacting to. One of the few polls of ours, I think he actually talked about on his stream, although I didn't really watch him daily. February 15th, 2023. And the Biden era was an arc of people abandoning racism. There was sort of peak racial sensitivity around the George Floyd period, despite everything we know now about George Floyd. But the numbers, especially around the George Floyd rioters and support of Black Lives Matter over those span of 3 or 4 years, really degraded. The numbers really went south. People gave up on Black Lives Matter. But also just racism in general. Like people were increasingly saying that race relations in America are poor, but then people would also say by increasingly numbers that they aren't concerned about being called racist. We got to the point where only 10% of white voters were very concerned about being called racist. That's like pretty low. So that's like only 1 in 10 Americans, white Americans, just walk up to a white guy in the street, and there's a 9 in 10 chance where it's like, do you care if I call you racist? And they're like, not really. Like, that's the result. That's where America's at. And in fact, many of them are like, oh, like, well, that's stupid. Why would I care if somebody called me racist? That's dumb. But at the time, this was a very controversial question. So if you're not familiar with the background, It's Okay to Be White was a 4chan troll. And there is a Southern Poverty Law Center and Anti-Defamation League had a page on it too, but of course they got rid of their whole glossary of hate terms. But It's Okay to Be White was declared by the ADL to be a hate term. It was, which is wild. It's Okay to Be White is a hate term, racist hate term. It's probably anti-Semitic too. So agree or disagree with this statement, It's Okay to Be White. And inexplicably, only 58% of Americans strongly agree it's okay to be white. That's kind of bad. Now, the number of people who don't strongly agree is less than the number of people, I think, who want slavery reparations, but pretty close. So that gives you an idea of where there's probably a pretty big Venn diagram overlap. Another 14% somewhat agree, for a combined total of 72% who agree. But imagine that, only 58% strongly agree. That just your skin color, like that it's okay. So the answer is like, okay, 42% of America just doesn't strongly agree it's okay to be white. Now, only 12% disagree, only 6% strongly. You got 17% not sure. But these people are cowards, scumbags. Why would you not answer this? Like, have an answer, people. Men are more willing to be disagreeable here and say they strongly agree it's okay to be white. The younger people were less likely to strongly agree. But overall, there's not much of an age signal when you include the somewhats. And women under 40, hotbed of liberalism, were least likely to strongly agree. Not half of them, only 46%. But they had the highest not sures. So an aspect of agreeableness there. Oh, hey, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. But this is the column that's the problem. Now, first off, only 67% of white Americans strongly agree it's okay to be white. So that level of self-hatred is kind of disappointing. Why would 13% of white Americans say not sure to that? And here's the thing, too, there's not that much of a party signal. Democrats are twice as likely as Republicans to say not sure, but still 69% of Democrats agree it's okay to be white, but 83% of Republicans and 65% of independents, which is pretty low, but independents are usually younger and more, racially mixed in our polling. And so that's one of the explanations. Black and Hispanic and younger people is a lot of the independents. Not all, but here is the black column. 42% of Black Americans strongly agree it's okay to be white. Another 11% somewhat, so 53%. Well, if you do the math, if 53% agree it's okay to be white, then 47% say no or didn't answer. So roughly half of Black Americans will not say that it's okay to be white. And that's the number that Scott Adams took umbrage with. Now, this is a signal. This is the biggest signal in the poll. These numbers here, 18%, that's the highest number of people in this poll that strongly disagree. And it's a 1,000-person poll. It was probably really more like 1,100. The subsample is not super huge here, but it's 140 people, give or take, probably 150 people sampled down. And that's the number. Prove me wrong if you don't like it. Questions aren't racist. This is the result. And roughly half of Black America doesn't agree that it's okay to be white. And that's when he said, look at this. I've tried so much. We've been through so much racial training. We try to be colorblind, and yet still Black people by almost half don't agree that I'm able to exist. And then he went on to say, well, this problem's not fixable and I have no solution. And then the only solution I have is that I shouldn't be around people who don't think I should exist. And so what he was doing was not being racist. He was responding to what in this poll is very clearly a racist signal. This is one race unwilling to say by 100% that another race should exist. That's wild. That's wrong. 81% of white Americans agree it's okay to be white. Only 53% of Black Americans agree it's okay to be white. That's a very big difference. But I mean, obviously there's some white hate and guilt among the white voters. Then the other question is, do you agree or disagree? Black people can be racist too. And yes, I got these questions from Mark Dice. That was the idea. The okay to be white had been around for a while. I think that actually happened during the first Trump administration. 4chan was printing out these papers and putting them on telephone poles in college campuses, and it was making people freak out. But we had never thought to ask the question. And Mark Dice's suggestion was to ask this, Black people can be racist too. And of course, this one surprised me. 79% of Americans agree that Black people can be racist, including 66%, 2/3 of Black people. So they acknowledge hey, we can be racist too. And then in this question, they kind of were. White Americans overwhelmingly agree, 81%, that Black people can be racist too. And men under 40, interestingly, were least likely to agree. And Democrats, only 39% of Democrats strongly agree that Black people can be racist too. That's kind of interesting. But, still overwhelmingly, 71% at least somewhat agree. And 84% of Republicans agree. Big numbers. So this one wasn't the surprise I thought it would be. I thought I'd get more of a signal. Married, not married, government employee, it doesn't matter. So we'll miss Scott. He was a public opinion aficionado. And it's really sad.